Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Wing Rising. Please be sure to like this video down below before you are finished watching, and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So the state of focus in today's installment of my 240 to Win series is that of Illinois. At first glance, this might be a curious state to talk about given recent election results, being that they all heavily favor the Democrats. Republicans have not won this state at the presidential level in a long time, dating all the way back to the 1988 election, with George H.W. Bush carrying the state narrowly by about 2 points. Since then, it has always voted blue every 4 years, and usually significantly so. And just 2 years ago in the midterms, they re-elected their Democratic liberal governor, J.B. Pritzker, by a 12-point landslide margin. And outside of very fluky wins for Republicans at the Senate level in 2010 and the governor level in 2014, both coming during red wave years, that were big enough to extend to Illinois, Democrats have maintained a firm grip on all major offices and sources of power in the state. So what possibly could be of interest in this state, and what could be competitive in this upcoming election? To answer that question, we first need to look at the political dynamics that take place in Illinois. More than half of the state population is concentrated in the Chicago metro area, in the northeastern corner of the state, and it outweighs the entirety of the vote coming from the rural and more Republican regions of the state, which is pretty much everywhere else, with few notable exceptions outside of the Chicago area in Illinois. If you look at a map from the state in recent elections, 95% of the state and its counties are red. But the problem is that these counties are so sparsely populated throughout this large state compared to the very dense population that votes very Democrat, so Democrat in fact, that it outweighs the rest of the state in one single county, that being Cook County that houses Chicago. And that is the blue county in the northeastern corner. About 3/4 of the state is actually farmland, which is really interesting because you don't think farms when you think of Illinois, you think of Chicago. But it has over 74,000 farms, in fact, which is crazy. And 96% of them are family owned and operated, not run by large farming corporations. And agriculture is a large part of the Illinois economy. In fact, they are the top producer in the country of soybeans and the second largest producer of corn. So most people think Chicago when they think Illinois, but there's a lot more to the state. However, unfortunately, there really is not much more to the state than Chicago when it comes to politics. And that has been the roadblock for Republicans making any inroads in the state for many years. A good thing, though, however, is that Chicago actually shifted right in 2020, just like New York City did, voting more for Donald Trump than they actually did in 2016. It might have only shifted by 3 points, which doesn't seem like a lot, but if that trend continues, it could actually make a big difference if Republicans, and Trump in this case, this year, could actually narrow the margin that he loses Cook County to Kamala Harris. And it's quite possible that that trend could not only continue, but actually increase, since crime and immigration have both been big factors in politics in Chicago in the last few years, and Trump is really strong on those issues, and he's running a campaign where such issues are a key part of his focus and his messaging. And a lot of voters are done with the progressive liberal policies on those issues, particularly crime, and are ready for a change. They're ready for something different, and they might even be willing to take a chance at voting for Republicans and Donald Trump. I'll come back to the presidential race in a minute, but first, let's take a quick look at some of the down-ballot races happening this fall. There is no U.S. Senate seat up for election this year from Illinois. None of these statewide offices are up for election, such as the governorship or the attorney general seat. Those happened in the midterms. But there's, of course, the state legislature elections happening this fall. They happen every 2 years. but they are irreparably gerrymandered to favor the Democrats. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding right here. In 2022, the Republicans lost the state Senate popular vote by only 3.5 points, but gained one single seat, that's it, to cut the majority of the Democrats down to 40 to 19, still a massive majority. And even better, the Republicans actually won the generic ballot for the state house by 2 points. It wasn't even like they won it by 1 vote. They won it by 2 points, which is actually a pretty significant victory in a Democratic state like Illinois, but they actually lost 5 seats to the Democrats. They won the generic ballot. They won the popular vote, just to reiterate this, and they actually lost seats. And Democrats padded their already large majority by 5 more seats. That's insane. So whenever Democrats complain and scream about gerrymandering in Republican states, just turn their attention to Illinois, where Republicans actually won the popular vote and actually lost seats. Like, that's insane. I just can't get over that. So you can forget about the state legislature. Republicans, I'm sure, will actually lose more seats, and they will gain none. So that is unfortunately a lost cause for a very long time for Republicans. And unfortunately, the same thing happened at the U.S. House level, where the maps were drawn and manipulated to give Democrats extra seats there too. Republicans did not have many seats to begin with. Republicans only lost 2 seats through the redistricting process. So this was not as an egregious version of gerrymandering as the state legislature maps were. But it's pretty hard to top that gerrymandering masterclass by the Democrats, so that's not saying much. But you can see just how horrifically drawn this map is, with districts just snaking all over the place, forming any kind of horrific shape to bunch counties together that will be most favorable for Democrats to win seats. It's just embarrassing, actually, the fact that courts rule that these maps were okay when they are not very compact. Not to go on a redistricting tangent, but you want districts, when they're drawn fairly, to be fairly compact, districts to be fairly rectangular and appealing to the eyes to look at, not just flying all over the place in weird snaky shapes, crisscrossing the state, clumping together counties that are not very similar in their demographics and culture. But unfortunately, this is what we're stuck with, so we're going to analyze it for this fall. There are 4 seats of interest in the Chicago metro area that are fairly competitive to some degree, although Democrats are still favored, obviously, because it's near Chicago. In the 6th district, the Democrat incumbent, Sean Casten, won by almost 9 points in 2022. This is a seat that voted for Biden by 11. It did get slightly more Republican during redistricting. There have been no polls of this race, so it's really hard to say which way it's leaning, although obviously Sean Casten is favored to win re-election again. But since he won by less than 10 points 2 years ago, this is not completely out of reach for Republicans on a good night for them. In the 8th district, the incumbent there won by 14 points in 2022. This is a seat that voted for Biden by 15.5, but it got almost 5 points more Republican. So while it is still a decently blue seat, Republicans have a much better shot at this seat than they did 4 years ago. But the incumbent has raised lots of money, already having $16 million in his campaign coffers by the end of February. But Republicans actually turned out at a really good clip in the primary, possibly showing some good enthusiasm in the district. So it is near certain that the Democrats will hold this seat, but it could actually be closer to a 10-point margin of victory, compared to the incumbent winning by closer to 15. And a seat that Republicans could continue to possibly make closer as the years go on. In the 11th district, the incumbent, Bill Foster, won by 13 points, a seat that Biden won by 15.5 points, just like in the 8th district. But it got 10 points more Republican after redistricting. There's only one poll from the seat that had Foster up by only 7 points against his opponent. So again, this is another seat that could get closer, but given that Foster won by 13 points 2 years ago, it would take a massive rightward shift to flip this seat. In the 14th district, the incumbent, Lauren Underwood, won by only 8 points in 2022 and just 20,000 votes. This is a seat that Biden won by 11.5 points. But Underwood underperformed that margin significantly in the midterms, and Republicans this year matched her vote total in the primary, so this could be underratedly close again. This seat, along with the 6th district, could actually be close and competitive. The 8th and the 11th districts are more of a long shot, but are still possible to be slightly competitive depending on what happens at the top of the ticket at the presidential level. Additionally, there are also 2 other House seats outside of the Chicago area in the state that are of interest. First, in the 13th district, where Nikki Budzinski won by 13 points in 2022. She is running again for re-election in this Biden plus 11 seat, although the former 13th district actually voted for Trump in 2020 but got much more Democrat following redistricting. Republicans did have decent primary turnout, but they have had really poor fundraising numbers so far in the seat, so it will make it almost impossible to win. And finally, the most competitive seat can be found in the 17th district. Eric Sorensen won by only 4 points and 10,000 votes in 2022. Another seat that was previously a Trump district that Democrats gerrymandered to make more blue. The Republican vote total in the primary actually topped Sorensen's total, hinting that this race could once again at least be close. The Republican nominee is doing well in fundraising for a challenger against an incumbent. There has only been one poll, and that showed Sorensen up by 9, which is a little bit questionable because I really do not predict that Democrats carry the seat by that much, especially in a presidential year. And most networks agree with me because they have forecasted this as a battleground district that only has a slight Democrat lean. So if Trump can improve his rural and suburban margins in Illinois, particularly in the northwestern side of the state bordering Iowa, which is very likely since he is favored to do even better in Iowa this time around compared to 2020, then there is an actual possibility Republicans could flip this seat. So this district and the 6th and 14th seats are the most realistic possibilities for Republicans to gain a House seat in Illinois. The 8th, 11th, and 13th districts are more long shots that are still likely to be competitive with a Democratic lean. Having said all of that, turning our focus back to the presidential level, Trump needs to run up the rural margins in the state, the majority of which also shifted Republican along with Chicago in the 2020 election. He also needs to improve in the suburbs, along with looking to continue the rightward trend in Chicago and the surrounding metro area and other suburbs in the state. If he does this, Illinois could actually get surprisingly closer than the margin that he lost it by in 2016 and 2020. He lost it to Hillary Clinton by a 55.5 to 38.5 margin, a 17-point loss. And 4 years ago, Biden got 57.5% of the vote, and Trump cracked 40% in the state. Again, a second straight 17-point loss. So the same margin of victory for the Democrats, but the nominee for each party gained 2 points from 2016. Given that the country as a whole shifted to the left 2.5 points in 2020 from 2016, but Illinois voted exactly the same way, that means that it trended to the right 2.5 points. If the national popular vote swings a couple points to the right this year, as is expected, look for Illinois to get within 15 points, and Donald Trump to get upwards of 42, maybe even 43% of the vote. And that would be really incredible, because Republicans have not done that well in many, many years. George W. Bush lost in 2000 by 12 points, and in 2004 he lost by 10. And that was the best Republicans did in the state and nationwide this century, since Bush is the last Republican nominee to win the popular vote 20 years ago. And he could not even get Illinois under 10 points. McCain then proceeded to get clobbered there by 25 points in 2008, with of course that being Obama's home state where he was a U.S. Senator. Romney did much better in 2012, losing by a 17-point margin just like Trump did. And even though that was the exact margin that Trump has lost the state twice, the state as a whole was more blue in 2012. Trump flipped a lot of counties red in 2016 and 2020 that were blue in 2012. showing that the state as a whole is shifting Republican. So with it being over a decade since Obama was last on the ballot, with his national image waning, his effect on the Democratic Party, and his effect on Democratic voters waning, it will be interesting to see if Republicans can make inroads in Chicago. If the suburbs across the state and in the Chicago metro area, along with the actual urban center of the city itself, shift to the right, while the rurals continue to get redder the further south in the state you go, then Republicans are going to be able to make tangible inroads in the state, and Trump will make the state closer in the fall when many people are not looking for it. This is the last Midwestern state that has not turned red, or at least become competitive or a toss-up or reasonably capable of being won by Republicans since Trump took the national stage 10 years ago. Indiana, as I talked about in my last video, has trended heavily to the right, as have some states that we will talk about in coming videos, and the entire Rust Belt that used to constitute the blue wall for Democrats has been shattered, and Trump has put that region back on the map for Republicans. But Illinois has continued to be the black sheep of the region thanks to Chicago, and is still pretty much out of reach for Republicans. Given this, the election this year is going to be very telling to see if that actually continues. If the GOP can target the right areas in the state and have an effective strategy, energize Republican voters to get out, and target enough swing voters to get out and cast a ballot for them instead of the Democrats, then they have a chance to turn their fortunes around. We have seen in 2010 and 2014, as I mentioned earlier, that Republicans can win the state. They did it at the Senate level, and they did it at the governor level 4 years apart. And how did they do that? By dominating the rural and suburban areas of the state, sweeping the table, clearing the board, winning everywhere, and most importantly, by narrowing the margin that they lost Chicago by. Sure, those were in midterm elections, not presidential elections when turnout is higher. But the formula is there. It's been done before, and Republicans need to go out and replicate it. And with Chicago ripe to be turning more to the right, given issues like crime, immigration, and the economy that are facing voters that are very favorable to Republicans who have more tangible, effective solutions to message than Democrats do. If Republicans are ever going to take a step in the right direction to make Illinois more competitive and possibly a Republican state in the future, or at least redder than it is now, this year is that time, and Trump is that candidate to energize enough voters in this region and in this state to make that happen.